At the heart of global diplomacy, where speeches echo beyond borders and gestures ripple through alliances, a declaration was made that could shift the course of a decades-long conflict. French President Emmanuel Macron, speaking before the United Nations General Assembly, made a bold, controversial and historic proclamation. France now recognises the State of Palestine. It was a sentence that landed with seismic impact, met with standing applause from some and resounding silence from others. The Palestinian delegation for a moment could be seen celebrating a diplomatic victory. Meanwhile, two sets of seats remained visibly empty, those of the Israeli and United States delegations, whose representatives deliberately boycotted the summit. Their absence was no accident. It was a silent but powerful protest, a clear indication that Macron's announcement was not welcomed by all. Still, he pressed forward, undeterred, embodying the posture of a leader determined to reshape the narrative. France's move marked a sharp pivot in Western foreign policy. For decades, Paris had walked a diplomatic tightrope between support for Israel and calls for Palestinian statehood. But on this September afternoon, the tightrope was replaced by a line drawn in the sand. What followed the announcement was no less symbolic. Macron descended from the podium to a chorus of reactions from fellow diplomats. He shook hands with Palestinian Ambassador Riyad Mansour and Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, gestures that underscored France's attempt to reposition itself as a bridge between the Arab world and the West. But this moment was about more than geopolitics. It was also deeply personal. For France, the scars of October 7th, 2023 remain raw. On that day, Hamas launched a brutal attack that killed 51 French nationals. The trauma reverberated through French society and solidified Macron's resolve. He addressed the tragedy with gravity and conviction, expressing solidarity with Israel, calling for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas, and pledging eternal remembrance of the victims. But he went further, promising that France would never abandon its existential fight against anti-Semitism. It was a delicate balance to strike. On one hand, a renewed commitment to Jewish communities in France and abroad. On the other, recognition of Palestinian sovereignty, a move that some critics argue undermines Israel's security and legitimacy. Macron's message was firm. These two positions are not mutually exclusive. In his speech, Macron explained that France's recognition of Palestine was not a concession to extremism, but a rebuke of it. A defeat, he said, for Hamas and for all who sow anti-Semitic hatred, anti-Zionist obsession and violent rejectionism. He called on the international community to reject false binaries where support for Palestinian rights is seen as antagonism toward Israel. He laid out his conditions clearly. The opening of a French embassy in the future state of Palestine would depend on two critical developments: the release of all hostages held in Gaza and the implementation of a lasting ceasefire. Until then, recognition would serve as a political signal, not a full diplomatic normalization. Then, with deliberate urgency, he declared, "Nothing justifies the continuation of the war in Gaza. Nothing." These were not words of indifference toward Israeli suffering. Rather, they were a plea for proportionality, for peace. Macron argued that continued military campaigns only compound the tragedy and fuel endless cycles of violence. Peace, he asserted, must begin now, if not sooner. He did not stop there. Macron called on the world to end the debate over Israel's existence. It is, in his view, a sovereign reality. But he also demanded justice for the Palestinian people, calling them brothers and neighbours who must be recognised in Gaza, the West Bank and Jerusalem. Peace, he said, will not come by ignoring one side's rights, but by affirming both. This vision of balance stood at the core of his argument. Macron told the Assembly, recognising Palestine's legitimacy does not diminish Israel's. On the contrary, it secures it by offering a path to peace that can only come from mutual dignity and coexistence. Still, his stance ignited backlash. Within hours, Israeli officials condemned the announcement as dangerous appeasement. US policymakers expressed disappointment that France acted unilaterally. Even within France, Jewish advocacy groups raised concerns, fearing it could empower those who deny Israel's right to exist. On the streets of Paris, protests erupted from both sides. Supporters of Palestinian sovereignty hailed Macron's move as a long overdue correction of Western hypocrisy. Opponents accused him of reckless grandstanding, of sacrificing historic alliances for moral posturing. Yet Macron remained steadfast. He framed France's decision as a necessary reset, a recalibration of the Western approach to a conflict that has long defied resolution. France, he argued, must not be a passive observer, nor a mere follower of Washington's lead. It must act with moral clarity and diplomatic independence. The historical context is crucial here. France was among the first Western powers to recognize Israel in 1949. It has long been a supporter of the two-state solution, but like many of its allies, hesitated to unilaterally recognize Palestine. That hesitation, Macron seemed to imply, has only prolonged the suffering on both sides. The world is watching. In Ramallah, Palestinian leaders hailed France's recognition as a major diplomatic victory. In Tel Aviv, it was seen as a betrayal. In Brussels, where EU unity is fragile, the move has sparked debate about whether other member states should follow suit. And in Washington, the Biden administration must now reckon with a Europe less aligned with US policy in the Middle East. Macron's speech was not just a moment, it was a message that France is willing to take diplomatic risks in pursuit of peace, that it refuses to let anti-Semitism or Islamophobia define its policies, that it believes peace can only emerge when the legitimate aspirations of both peoples are met, not denied, dismissed, or delayed. He positioned this recognition as an act of defiance, not against Israel, but against those who profit from endless war, against those who spread hate in the guise of ideology, and against the notion that history must repeat itself indefinitely. As Macron concluded his remarks, he offered a simple but powerful framing. The recognition of the State of Palestine is a defeat for hatred and a step toward peace. It is, of course, only one step. Recognition does not resolve occupation. It does not dismantle settlements or return hostages or erase grief, but it is a beginning, a signal that diplomacy, even when contested, still matters. In the days to follow, Macron's announcement will be scrutinized, analyzed, and politicized. But in that moment, on that global stage, France chose to lead rather than follow, to challenge the status quo rather than protect it, to take a risk in the name of resolution. What happens next will depend on more than speeches. It will require political courage, regional cooperation, and the willingness to envision a different future. But one thing is certain, France has declared its intent, not just to support peace, but to actively shape it. And that, whether welcomed or not, cannot be ignored.
Je déclare que la France reconnaît aujourd'hui l'État de Palestine.
There are hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced.
Traumatisés.
Intensification of settler violence. All of these must be defended from the people's democratic, viable, sovereign states.
Ils ont juste éteint le feu. Merci.
Nous disons notre compassion aux Israéliens et exigeons avant toute autre chose que tous les otages encore détenus par le Hamas soient libérés sans aucune condition. Nous, Français, avons rendu un hommage national à nos 51 compatriotes assassinés ce jour-là et à toutes les victimes du 7 octobre 2023. Nous ne les oublierons pas, jamais. Comme jamais, nous ne cesserons le combat existentiel contre l'antisémitisme. C'est dans ce cadre aussi que je pourrais décider d'établir une ambassade auprès de l'État de Palestine dès lors que tous les otages détenus à Gaza auront été libérés et qu'un cessez-le-feu aura été établi. Rien ne justifie plus la poursuite de la guerre à Gaza. Rien. Tout commande au contraire d'y mettre un terme définitif maintenant, à défaut de l'avoir fait plus tôt, pour sauver des vies. Le temps est venu de ne plus discuter nulle part l'existence d'un État d'Israël et d'en faire une évidence. Le temps est venu de rendre justice au peuple palestinien et ainsi de reconnaître un État de Palestine, frère et voisin, à Gaza et en Cisjordanie et par Jérusalem. Le temps est venu de chasser de ces terres le visage hideux du terrorisme et de bâtir la paix. Et la reconnaissance des droits légitimes du peuple palestinien n'enlève rien aux droits du peuple israélien, que la France a soutenu dès le premier jour et au respect desquels elle n'est pas moins attachée. Précisément car nous sommes convaincus que cette reconnaissance est la solution qui seule permettra la paix pour Israël. Cette reconnaissance de l'État de Palestine est une défaite pour le Hamas, comme pour tous ceux qui attisent la haine antisémite, nourrissent des obsessions antisionistes et veulent la destruction de l'État d'Israël.